welcome everyone, and thank you for being here. This is the 5th masterclass, and it's going to be about the Northern Arctic butterfly species. Who is Niels? Niels Rydholm, the speaker of today, is a professor from the University of 𝘉𝘂𝘬𝘓 in Sweden, and his main working path is working with biodiversity in infrastructure habitats, working with power lines, solar parks, motor tracks, airfields, road bridges, and his research is about maintaining and enhancing the biodiversity in these sites. He's part of the National and EU Red List Committee, committees for Lepidoptera, which includes the butterfly species and the moth species. And is also working as an advisor for the Swedish Environmental Agency, and also advisor for the conservation of the most endangered butterfly species in Sweden. Today, Niels is going to talk about the species of the Northern Arctic butterfly species. And the floor is yours, Niels, and thank you very much for being here and share your knowledge with us.
Thank you. I have a bit of a cough today. I hope that I have so tamed it with a lot of medicine now. But you have to excuse me if I'm starting to cough somewhere in the talk. That's a bit of the harsh environments up here, you know. So this will then be about the Bolorias, as we heard, and about the Saturnines, the Oeneis and Erebia groups, and there's also some blues and some skippers to Pyrgus, and then also the northern 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘢 and some 𝘠𝑦𝑎 species. That's about it for today. And basically, if you compare these species, it's fewer and they are not so difficult to distinguish as the Central European mountain Erebias or the Polymathus from Mediterranean. So most of the problems you will encounter if you come from Central Europe is to figure out where to find them rather than to distinguish them, because they have as all species, they have very, very strict demands. But if I'm telling you it's a bog species, doesn't mean that it flies on every type of bog also, and it's an alpine species, it will not fly on every mountain. So a lot of the problems you will encounter here will be a bit different if you compare it to Central Europe. So it will be a bit more about finding the right habitat than figure out what species it is. And it is also so that the timing may be a bit complicated, because in the very north, so the summer season or the flight season would normally be some 6 weeks, but if it's a harsh year, it can go down to the snow flight season at all, or at least, so if they're a bit more lucky, that is, it's then at least 3 or 4 weeks, which means that all these species have then multi-annual life cycles, which are very flexible. So they have encountered a year where they had no chance to reproduce, and then this generation is lost. But since the 𝘉𝘰𝘵𝘢 then hibernated another year as pupa or as larvae, they are still remaining in this season, but in this region, sorry. So there's big differences compared with if you go to Mediterranean, we can assume that you get a lot of sunshine. That here the timing will also be a bit complicated. So you cannot calculate that you can fly to northern Fennoscandia and fix everything in a week, because it may snow the entire week you're there then. So you need, as in many other cases, a little bit of extra time. And then it's also then so, as I've been writing here, this works, that most of these the real northern ones species, they are in the mountains or in bog habitats. So in meadows and so on, there are no specialists in to any large extent. So this means if you go here to look for these things, you will end up on the bogs with mosquitoes or in the mountains with mosquitoes, because there's also a variation. When it flies a lot of mosquitoes, it's the best time for the butterflies. That's the way it is. I have also included then a number of not really boreal species, but species which is good for you to know if you go there, because you will encounter them and they may look slightly different from what you're used to, and then you may be a bit optimistic in what you're looking at. and as them is saying that we have then different types of alpine vegetation, but what is very typical that is sparse and it's low. You don't find any high vegetation up in the tundra, not in the old times and in these important habitats, because all these habitats have low vegetation where the sun hits the ground and heats it, because all these Arctic species needs solar radiation for their life cycle. And this is then a problem, because with the global warming, these habitats are changing rapidly and getting overgrowth. Also above the timberline, where you get a lot of grasses, and then so the global climate gets warmer, but the microclimate gets then colder, and this is a severe problem. And it's also the same when it comes to the bogs, that they are getting overgrown because there's no snow in the winter and there's too little water in springtime. So the bogs were kept open by winter seasons and so forth are now rapidly overgrowing, and it means that a number of these bog species are now retreating northwards, and this is also known from the continent where the bog species also are vanishing rather rapidly. The illustrations which I'm using here were made for a book which I produced together with Martin Holmers and a few other authors, so some 20 years ago, and I borrowed these one from him, and if you need these ones, you can contact him if you would like to use them for some purposes. Then let's see, I have to do like this. And then we have the Boloria species, and the ones which are underlined are actually the northern ones. And totally you have the Bolorias which are found, but it's only these ones which are underlined which are actually the northern ones. And so we don't have Boloria pales in the northern mountains, so it makes it a bit easier, because then you don't have the problems to distinguish between Boloria napea and Aquilonaris and pales, so that makes things a bit easier in our part of the world. I included also Brentis ina, which may cause some trouble before you have some routine to change to distinguish this from the other real Bolorias. So I have to get used to use my keyboard instead. So if you look on this IUCN map, you get a feeling that this is extremely widespread species, but this map, I'm afraid, is a bit optimistic. So if you go into details, of course, it will be much more scattered, but it's a very widespread species. And it's also so that Scandinavia is some than 2,000 kilometers long. So when I'm talking about the flight period, it of course starts earlier in the south than in the north. So this flight period here covers the entire part. So it's actually not flying all the time at every spot, but of course it then flies earlier in the south than in the north. And it may also be so that here it's finish flying before it even starts up in the north. So to see this more or less as some kind of average and guideline, it may not be like this in the mountains. Then you'll go somewhere in the middle, and so this olive green means that this is the initial part, and that one is the ending part, and the more intense leaf green is then the major flight period. So the habitat is then wet meadows, all kind of wetlands, more or less, not very wet, but so bogs, mares, and with mares I mean very wet bogs. Bogs are these raised ones which you get very warm in summer, and you can go there with dry feet, whereas mares you need to have some boots. So, and it flies up to the tree line. The tree line varies a lot. In southern Scandinavia, the tree line may be 1,200 meters, and up in the Arctic, its tree line is down by the sea level, more or less. So I just write the tree line because it varies between the mountains here and the Arctic areas up here. And occasionally you can find these species above, and that's then the problem to distinguish this between this and the next species. And it's feeding then on plants which are then connected to wetlands, so Vaccinia moxycoccus and Andromeda polyfolia, could be also other host plants. And this species is recognized because it's intense orange when it's fresh, extremely. No other species is intensely orange as this one, and the male is then more intensely orange than the female. And 𝘍𝑝𝘬 is then distinctly more pale in coloring. You can see here that the flight period is also much more distinct because it only occurs in the mountains. So it's end of July normally. And if you compare that between what IUCN states and the reality, you can see that it's, even though it's widespread and a common species, it's distinctly much more scattered than you get a feeling when you see this map. And this goes for every of these species. So, and the habitats is then flower-rich, fairly wet tundra heaths, and it's mainly above tree lines, but also close to the tree line, or maybe also on some wetlands slightly below tree line. And it feeds on this yellow-violet, which occurs in the mountains, Viola biflora, and also so Bistorta vivipara occasionally. And this species is then much more yellowish and paler in general coloring than Aquilonaris. And if you compare them, you can see that Aquilonaris is then more orange, of course, mainly when they're fresh, than this one. It has also more distinct black markings. They are really black and distinct, whereas on 𝘍𝑝𝘬, they are thinner and more suffused. And so we don't have Clossiana dia in the northern countries. So these are the only two where you have the hind wing, which has this kind of edge in the forepart. All other Bolorias has rounded hind wings. And since this one goes slightly above tree lines, occasionally this goes slightly below you, they may be in the same area. But you can check this also, that this one has this part here is differing from this one. So this upper part is wider and shorter, whereas here it is more slender and more elongated. But normally you can see on the color, and if you see them up on the wet tundra heath, it's highly likely that it will be Boloria 𝘍𝑝𝘬. Then we got up to the real Arctic species, and so if you check the distribution, it looks to be very widespread, but actually, if you look on the real thing, it's only high up on the tops. So it's only in areas where you have sufficient high tops to produce these subnivel habitats where you have very sparse vegetation and a lot of open ground. So it's not a widespread species. You need to go up on higher altitudes to get it at all. And so it's only on these alpine stony heaths and screes. It's so cold that the stones are moving between the seasons, so it's never gets overgrown now. And as I was saying, it's very close to the upper vegetation limit. So if you go further up, you have hardly any vegetation at all. And the host plant is then presumably this heather species, Cassiope tetragona. It may be also other species. It's a bit hard to know because it seems that a number of these are eating whatever they can find, but there seem to be some kind of preferences. And the flight period is then mainly in July, but if it's a very bad year, they can fly in August if there's come some season, which is possible to fly. So this is very variable. And this is one of the most exotic species which we have in the north. So I have to use my keyboard again. And the others of these very Arctic species is then this Boloria polaris, which also seems to be rather widespread, but it is presumably already due to extinct from Sweden due to the climatic reasons, but it's still in the central part of northern Norway and occasionally, at least in a few places, then in northernmost Finland. You can see here is on GBIF map. This is the recent finds in this area, so it's very different from what's on the IUCN map. But Russia, I don't know exactly. I think it's doing well up here at least. But you can see things looks better on this map than in reality. It's not been found in Sweden since 2022, I believe. This is then a bit earlier, this species flies than end of June, beginning of July. So it's the first of these real Arctic species. And this flies on lower altitudes than the previous one. So the previous one is flying up here on 1,200 meters to 1,000 meters, and here we are on some 500 meters. This is a limestone and flower-rich area. So they have quite different habitats, and I've never seen them on the same site. So they're all very calcare-rich, tundra, and this is also well above timberline, but so 500 meters lower altitude than 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘳𝘕. And it's presumably feeding, at least in Sweden, on 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘳𝘠 and presumably also other things. So on the next slide, I will show that this one have a double X, but on this illustration, it has only a single white X. But this picture, you can see here, it has a double white X. This is very typical for this species. And if you compare these two, so 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘳𝘠 is much brighter orange, at least when fresh, and it has less pronounced dark areas. However, in both these cases, they are very dark specimens. So when they have a lot of dark things, you will not have this clear cut, that these ones are rounded and these more triangular, because that things goes together. But as long as they're fresh, these ones are clearly more orange. These ones are never as orange as these ones. And particularly in the males of Cariclia, they have more pointed wings, or the wingtips of forewings are more pointed. But better characters are on the underside, because this one has a white central band, whereas this central band is not white. But the beginning has this white X, and occasionally you have this white X, as I was showing on the previous slide. So on the underside, they are fairly easy to distinguish. And as I said, I've never seen them occur on the same site, on the same mountain, but on the very different habitats and altitudes. Then we have this Boloria improba, which also looks to be a bit so widespread, but actually there are very few habitats. And this is a species which flies on a habitat. If you didn't know that it should be there, you would never expect a butterfly to be flying on this barren ground. So there are some very, very low solic species, and also some heather species, but otherwise there's nothing to feed on. But this is really the habitat. And it seems to prefer also habitats which are wind-blown in winter. So when the sun comes in springtime, they will start to feed, even though they have to survive the larvae -40 in wintertime. They prefer to be here than on the snow cover. So it's a very extreme habitat. So also very sparse vegetation, and you realize that if this habitat and change it get overgrown by grass, this species has no chance. And this is what's happened with a lot of these lower and more southern habitats. So we have very little left of these species, and the future looks very bleak for this as well. And presumably this feeds down then on mainland solics, and these solics then are 3 centimeters high. So they are, even though they're wooded plants, they are not very spectacular. And this is small and darkish, and you cannot so call it as a, you cannot misinterpret it and distinguish it wrongly, because it's look quite different. It's only half size of the other Bolorias and very dark. Then we have a species which is not really alpine, but it occurs in this area, but it's actually more in the lowlands habitats, so close to streams, both in taiga forest and betula and alnus forest in the mountain regions. It also occurs then in Russia and corresponding areas of southeastern Finland. So you will not encounter this one up in the real mountains, but if you go down in the river valleys, so you can find it. It also feeds on this yellow violet, which occurs in these wetter areas. So it's actually not a real alpine species. It also occurs in the Alps, but it looks quite different from them. And then I added this Boloria titania, which is also known from the Alps, which occur in the same area of southeastern and southern Finland, but it's not in the rest of the Scandinavian part. It looks slightly different from the alpine individuals, but it's easy to distinguish, as you will see from Boloria thorium. It's so in clearings in woodland and forest fringes, so along roadsides, and it feeds then on different kind of viola species, and it flies also then in July. And these ones are not so complicated to differ, because 𝘬𝘪𝘀 is pale, or at least not so bright colored, and all these markings are diffuse, whereas Titania has very distinct markings and much more brightly colored. And you can see this has a lot of triangles around, so whereas this one has no triangles, so it's quite easy to distinguish. Also, on the other side, this is diffuse and this is very distinct, and this one has also these black triangles on the other side. So it's not hard to distinguish these ones, even though they're flying together. Then we go to another bog species. This is then a species which is widespread, but it's also declining. It's already gone from the Baltic area, and it flies then on bogs below timberline and on wet tundra heaths above timberline and in timberline. And it feeds on cloudberry, Rubus camemoris, which is widespread in these kind of habitats, but also on other vaccinium species and Andromeda polyfolia. This is the earliest of the mountain Boloria species. It flies then already in mid or early May and flies then until mid-June normally, and in the very north it can fly into July, but mainly it is finished somewhere in mid-June. This is a small and fairly pale Boloria with a unique pattern which is distinguishes from all other species. And it flies then in the same habitat as Boloria frigga. So exactly the same habitats, but Freya flies mainly in the open area. Frigga flies both in the open areas and in the woodland in between. It's also widespread as the previous one, but this one flies then considerably much later. So often you don't see these species together, but if it's a compressed season, so with the late spring, you can see them fly together because it's the same habitat and the same host plant. But there's no problem to distinguish them because this one is a small pale one which flutters low over the terrain. It really flutters. It could have been a period more or less. It's not a distinct flyer, whereas Frigga flies like a big Argiades. It's a very rapid flyer and very distinct. So even if they're flying together, you can instantly see which species it is, because this one is much more orange and it's a rapid flyer, whereas this is brownish orange or orange brownish, bit darker, smaller, and easily you can net it to see it like it were a period. And also the wing pattern are quite different, both on the underside and the upper side. So flight period and behavior and appearance makes these ones easy to distinguish. Then we come in on these which are not so particular, so Arctic or very boreal. Eunomia has its main European distribution in Fennoscandia, but it's in bogs, not so in tundra habits. So it's widespread, and it's on the bogs and mires, so wet up to tree lines. You can encounter it so on the border, so fringes of tundra, but mainly not. And it feeds on various kind of vaccinium species. So it's a good indicator of quality of bogs, but it remains on bogs, not going up on the mountains mainly. It was a bit more widespread in the southern Sweden, so we can see now that it's going upwards or northwards in the same rate as these bogs are overgrown by pines in the south. And then we have three meadow species. One is then Boloria 𝘰𝘰𝘦𝘀, which is all over the place and flies in south in 2 generations and in the north in 1 generation. And of course, this may vary over here. So it's meadows of various kinds. So mainly towards the wetter part. Could also be in woodland clearings. We have a very dense forest here, as you may know, in the Nordic countries, and so woodland clearings could work for a few years when the violas are coming up. And occasionally it's been found over a tree line. This species mainly remains not getting very much darker in the north than whereas many of others of these species are getting more and more dark, so and they're thus getting more confused. And one of these extreme ones is the 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘅, which can become much more darker and even could be almost blackish violet. So if you get something which looks really very unique, it's presumably a very dark form of 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘅. And this species is all over the place as well. But they also are mainly on this kind of wet meadows. And it's the same with this one. It's up to the tree line, and so this can be confused with the Boloria napea if you not watch out. They're very different with this wing shape and so forth. But if you're very optimistic, you may end up making some very too optimistic determination. It feeds also on a number of viola species, and all these Bolorias which are feeding on viola on meadows are doing very badly or poorly in Scandinavia because the violas are so vanishing due to changes of land use. And the last one of these so-called Boloria is then Brentis ino, which has a different family. And this is then differs from the other one because it does not occur in the very north. So you will not encounter up in the mountains, but in the southern mountains you may encounter it as well. This is then also very pale compared with the other ones, and it seems not to become darker in the north. This is a specimen from the Arctic Circle, almost Arctic Circle up here, and it's still very pale. And it's also the latest flying of these small fritillaries. It flies then so in the north, then from somewhere mid-July and well into August. So this is the absolute latest one that you will see if you are in the north in August. It feeds then on 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘅, which is a widespread wetland so plant, but it's only the butterfly only occurs where you have spread plants, where you have intense stands of these ones. You will not find this one. It should also be able to feed on cloudberry in some wetlands in the north, but I have not experienced that. But according to literature, that's the case. And I will not so go through this in detail, but it's easy to distinguish one. So 𝘉.𝘧𝘳𝘦 and 𝘰𝘰𝘦 has this black dot on the upper side, and 𝘰𝘰𝘦 has then a big black dot on the other side, whereas this one has not, whereas the ino and eunomia has no black dot whatsoever. And these ones have this one has these white triangles on the other side, and it has not any triangles but a white band. And this one has white spots, this one has black spots, this one has almost no spots, and this has so brown encircled white small blotches and has this pale underside. So these ones are more complicated to distinguish than the actual Arcto-alpine species. And you have all the details you need, but I don't think there's any point to go through all these ones. So then we take some questions if there are any.
We have a comment from Juha. I hope I'm pronouncing okay that name. It's mentioning that Titania is close to extinction in Finland now. I don't know if you can add any more knowledge there about the situation.
Well, it's declining, so it may be as a lot of things are doing badly. So I don't think it's doing very good, but it may be that my information is, if its name is 𝘢𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘯𝘓, it's presumably someone who has better knowledge than me.
Okay. I have one question, Niels. You have been presenting species sometimes in pairs to differentiate. How many Bolorias can we find in a given spot? You talk about different habitat requirements, different habitats from tree line to open areas. Is there any habitat that can host, I would say, Boloria, Clonaris, Frosine? I would say there are places that could have several of these species together, right?
Yes, so you have a matter of timing also, but on wet meadows you can so in early season you can get Boloria silene and Frosine. They have slightly different habitats, but that's a bit beyond the scope. And later on the season you can find this, and in the very north, if you have a compressed season, you can find eventually very warm silene flying together with very fresh ino. So these may occur together, and on the bogs you can also find it eunomia and Frosine together. So and as I've shown that Frigga and Freja may occur on the wet tundras and wetlands if the season has also been compressed. And occasionally you can also find that then the Frigga, which goes a bit outside from the open wetlands together with Frosine. So, but that's more than an exception.
Yes, no, but it complicates the situation. If you have to identify several of those Bolorias, it can get tricky.
Yeah, so that's why I added these ones, which are on this picture, because they make, if they were not here, someone would think that they have found very new sites for the rare species. So therefore it's good to know that these ones are around as well.
Yes, all right. There are no more questions. I hope someone at some point, don't feel shy if you want to ask anything. We can do it also at the end of the presentation. I think we can. There is one more question, well, or is a comment at least. In Romania, Boloria Selene, Euphrosyne, Titania, and Brentis Ino can occur together. So we have already a combo of 4 species together, and it's complicated. Definitely, there are certain places in Europe where all these species or several of these species can occur, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Something else, Niels? Sorry.
Yeah, so I would just like to add that it's rather typical that you can see. I will give a few other examples later on that you have this case that in one area they are flying together, in another area they are not, and they may shift in house plants and so forth. So this may also then mean that they shift habitats so I think this is a recurrent pattern for a number of lepidopterans and other insects as well.
Yes, you wonder what is different. What is the difference between these two sites that have resulted in the presence or not of certain species? Definitely. I think Christina is also here to confirm. I think we could do we are going to continue with the Oeneis before the break. Is that true, Niels?
Yeah,
I think so.
All right.
Let's go.
let's continue.
This is much more straightforward, and only 3 species. So I think
All
so.
right, let's do it then.
So 𝘰𝘧𝘧𝘰𝘣𝘢 is then also a northern species, which are purely a bog species. It does not go up in the tundra areas, and it flies in bogs where you have, or the fringes of bog where you have some old trees. So if the entire bog is overgrown, the species vanishes as well. But it flies within these pine woodland and in the fringes of major bogs. So and what's interesting is that it flies mainly then even years. Even we can see a pattern now with this so warmer climate that it flies more also uneven years. So it has a 2-year life cycle at least. And it means that even years you can find it much more easily than odd years. And it's also a fairly early species, so it flies in June and just goes in the northern distribution a bit in July. And this is if you don't expect to encounter, you get shocked. It's because it flies out from the sea, poof. So and it's extremely well camouflaged on these pine trees. So and to chase it in these habitats is some kind of challenge. So because these bogs are not very plain. So to take the pictures, you will have some of them. But it's a very widespread species on almost all major bogs, not the small ones, but on major bogs, you will find these species in even years. Then you have the Genus Norna, so which is slightly smaller. It's only in the wetland tundras and corresponding bogs in the tree lines. It do not go down to lowland, so peat bogs. It's only close to the mountain and in the wetland tundras. So it has a bit more there. It feeds then on carex. I think I forgot to say the previous one was on 𝘰𝘩𝘭𝘰𝘳𝘀. So these semi-grass types. It's also so quite easy to distinguish. The males have a different wing form from the females and are a bit more intensely colored. So this is the type of habitat. So you're in these low mountain areas and you have this kind of wetland. And it flies so slightly later than 𝘰𝘧𝘧𝘧𝘰𝘣𝘢, and I've never seen these two species on the same habitat. So from late June until mid-July, you can find it, and it's all down to the southern mountain range in Sweden and Norway. And then you have the northernmost one. It's the same that we have only a few sites. It's gone extinct on the number of sites. On this site, it's also extinct now. So it's very few sites left. And it flies then also in July. And in the poor year, it can fly even later. And typically, it is very barren ground. It's like this 𝘉𝘠𝘅, but on much lower altitudes. So as soon as this habitat gets overgrown, the species vanishes. I take so something. So this species is doing badly, and there's a number of endangered moths on exactly the same habitat. It's a very warm habitat when the sun is shining, but as you can see, it's very, very, very thin and sparse vegetated. It feeds then on a very widespread grass, which is found all over the mountains, also in other kind of habitats. So this is very peculiar. If you don't believe, if you don't know that you can find a butterfly here, you will not look for a butterfly in such an area. And these ones are also quite easy to distinguish. 𝘰𝘦𝘧𝘪𝘢 has a lot of eye spots. There's also eye spots on the hind wing. This one has a black eye spot. These species has a few, so eye spots could be varying, and also has one white spot on the hind wing. And 𝘰𝘦𝘗𝘵𝘀𝘍 has no eye spots whatsoever. What I forgot to say, I go backwards, so that in Siberia there are a number of different species, and in Finland they have started to study. There may be more than these 3 species also in Fennoscandia. But this is not solved yet. So what with DNA we will have better knowledge in due time. But if you find something which looks a bit strange, bring it, because there may be other species around than these 3. But basically easy to distinguish. They do not fly together. This is a very dry, barren habitat. This is then on the wetland tundra, and this is only on bogs. And this is also the corresponding size. This is considerably bigger than the other ones, and this is slightly smaller than Norna. So, are there any questions?
No questions. To continue.
Then so Erebia in Fennoscandia is much easier than in the Central European mountains. So here we only have then 5 species altogether, and they are not very complicated to distinguish. And this is the same thing that which were underlined or Arctic or mountain. And there's always this discussion whether Erebia polaris is a subspecies of 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘳𝘠 or not, and so some are saying that polaris is a good species, and some are to say subspecies of the Central European 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘳𝑚, and I'm not sure about this, so I'll leave it like that. So one of the specialists, at least, is this 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘭𝘢, which flies on exactly the same habitat as than Boloria frigga, this forest, or these pine fringes on bogs, and it also occurs even on smaller bogs, and also on bogs where there are hardly any open areas left. So that's the typical one, and it's also a widespread species in the northern part of Fennoscandia, so almost entire Finland, and from the same latitude, more or less, but to a lesser extent in Norway. And this habitat, you will find this species in a number of places here, and it's also so retreating northwards in the south at the moment, and it flies then in June. It flies together with this Boloria frigga on exactly the same habitat. So it starts to fly when the Boloria freya goes to its end, and this is feeds then on carex, and you can see them, these black, for being Erebias, fairly large Erebias, so flying in this terrain, and then they will sit often of the tree trunks of Yeah, and as I was saying, then with Oeneis jutta, which may occur in the same habitats, occasionally also at the same time. So you can see that this species is flying more, so more it's more frequent rather, I would say, in even years. You have 2009, 20, and 21, and so forth. So it's also typical, and as many other species, they have this at least biannual life cycle, but it's clearly so that even years you have more of them. So and a lot of Lepidopteran species have the same pattern, also some moths, and this is varying between different parts of the world. So for some of the noctuids moth, we have a distinct border here where they're flying even years on this side, and from this part of Finland and eastwards, they're flying mainly uneven years, and this is a very interesting pattern. And then we have the others of the northern, so more or less unique than Erebia species, 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘅. And if you look on this distribution, so it seems to be very widespread, also so done in Siberia, but in reality, it's not at all so on every place. And this habitat is quite different. This is really a wetland. This is taiga wetlands. So in the northern taiga forests, so you have this area, and here it's so wet that you may break your legs. So if you try to run on this place, or just falling into some kind of water pit. And the problem, so forest is normally not a problem for the northern butterfly species, because they are depending on open ground. But if this taiga forest is logged, of whatever reason, it seems that also 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘅 has problem when everything is getting open. But so this habitat is quite different, and this species is also then flying a bit later than 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘅, even though they co-occur in the shift of June, July. And as I said, this may vary between years how this is shifted, but basically the thing. And this one is feeding on various grasses. So the other ones were feeding on these semi-grasses. And here you can see the same thing, that they are much more frequent in even years than in odd years. And this is also relatively large 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰. And if you compare these ones, they are not very difficult to separate, because 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰 has eye spots on both fore and hind wings, and 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰 has these more suffused, all the blackish eye spots on the forewings. So there are different habitats, and the eye spots are quite different. Some of these females may have these areas are almost bright yellow around these things. So they have more or less yellow bands on fore and hind wings. And also on the underside, you can see the difference, because these ones have eye spots which are so white nucleus like this, and these ones have all these small black eye spots. And on the hind wings, you have a small black eye spot that's corresponding to this spot, and you have often a white blotch on the hind wing. And this is then mainly more or less blackish or brownish black, whereas this one has a distinct darker central part of the hind wing, and the rest is more grayish. And this is pronounced as long as they're not very worn. So you can easily see on the underside what species this is, but already on the habitat you can distinguish these species quite easily. I've never seen a Boloria frigga been flying together with 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘅. It may, of course, occur, but I've never seen it, so it's quite rare at least. Then you have 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘦𝘭𝘰𝘯𝘕, which is then all over the European mountains, and in the Nordic part it flies on these wetter tundra heath, and also so down into the tree line and below the tree line in open areas in birch forest. You can find it so above and below tree line, but not up in high up in the mountains, and you will not find any 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘆 species on higher altitudes in Scandinavia at all. And it's also very easy to distinguish from other species because it has this kind of wing pattern, and it has these ones, the red part of the underside of the forewing, so it can actually not be so misdetermined by any other species. It flies also then together often with Boloria napea. And then we have this Polaris or Medusa, and this looks like it's widespread, but it's actually only in the lowland valleys where you have this kind of sandy ground, very dry sandy ground, and this habitat is all very dry. So it's not all over the place. It's only in the valleys or in lowland areas where you have this sandy kind of soil, and presume it feeds then again of this very common grass, Festuca ovina. It has then a fairly short flight period in July, and it's only in the north, so it's you cannot not distinguish this one from others. I'll show you soon the comparison with 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘆. And 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘆 is also all over the place in Europe. And this is then flying in woodlands of all kinds and clearings, and this is then flying considerably later than the other 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘆s. So in mountain areas, it flies so late that you can see the trees may starting to change color. So this is one of the latest quote summer butterflies of the non-hibernating adult butterflies, which you will encounter in mountainous areas. So you cannot not also have any problem of distinguish it. So it's a lot of different kinds. So road verges and every place more or less with openings in woodlands, both so deciduous woodlands and coniferous woodlands of various kinds. It feeds also on different grasses. One interesting thing with 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘆 is that if you check for Sweden and Finland, and here you have seems to be the same, that it flies mainly odd years, which is then different from the other 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘆s, which I show 𝘉 and 𝘠𝘰𝘊, and fewer in even years. Whereas if you go to Western Norway, so on the other side of the watershed, it's opposite. There they're flying like all other 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘆s, so more abundant in even years. So this is just good to know. But if you go to Sweden, you know that it's highly more likely you will see 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘆 in odd years, whereas the rest of the 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰s will be presumably more of in even years. And as I said, they are not very complicated to distinguish. These ones, so this is the only one where I have this intense red band on fore and hind wings. There are mountain forms which are then much darker, as so many other. But basically, you had red bands more or less intense on both fore and hind wings, whereas in Polaris, you may have some red bands. But there will not be red bands all over the place. And if you look on the other side, here you have sun blotches here, and you have only the red band on the forewing on 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘅. But still here you just have the red surroundings of the uppermost of these eye spots. And on the other side of 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰, you can see that you have these kind of white markings, which are not on Polaris. And 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰 is also considerably much larger, and 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰 is not connected to this kind of open habitat as Polaris, but they're flying in the vicinities. You can encounter them on the same spot. So then we go back to these ones and see if there are any questions on the Erebias.
We have one comment again from Yua. It's about Erebia uriale, and that is quite close to the border between Finland and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And I add to this comment: is there any recent study about expansion of uriale, or what can you add about this species?
I didn't add these ones because it does not occur together with any of the mountainous ones. But 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘅 is a bit more complicated than to distinguish than the other. But I think 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰 was part of the Central European. But I'm not quite sure what's the status of it in eastern Finland. There's been scattered finds, and also in Finland, but as far as I recall, I don't think it's resident in Finland. Perhaps you could add some additional information there as well. Okay,
we will wait for any comment, and I will let you know.
So what was the family name of 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰? Which 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰? There's many 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰s in Finland.
Sorry?
So what's the family name of this 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰? I cannot recall what you said from the.
No, it's a short name. Just
okay.
Just you
okay.
know, there is no more information.
Okay. But that's the reason why, since it's not so any of these others, it's not in the near from any of the other ones. I didn't add 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘅.
Yes. Okay. I understand now. All right. Let's continue. Yeah.
Yes. Then we have this Argiades orbitulus, and this is a bit interesting because in the Alps you have this orbitulus flies together with the Argiades glandon, the other species. So there are a number of so glandon derivates on the various mountains in Europe, and we have this what now is called aquilo in here. But it's interesting because these both they are in the same areas, so glandon and orbitulus in the Alps and exactly on the same habitats, whereas then orbitulus and the northern species aquilo are both distinct different habitats and in different areas, as you will see. So this has a rather southern distribution in the Scandinavian mountains. So whereas a lot of other species goes further north, this goes actually further south and further west into wetter areas. And this is in our part of the world on gravel and rocky grounds, often on calcareous bedrocks, which is good for the host plant, Astragalus alpinus. And it occurs both under and above tree line. And this once was a rather exotic species in our part of the world, but now it is spreading so along small roads into the woodlands, where where the host plant is now spreading in the road verges. So it's more abundant in road verges nowadays than up in the mountains. But these habitats are, of course, more spectacular than a small gravel road in the forest production area. But the species as such, you cannot not mistake for anything with the other species, because this underside is absolutely unique. There's no other species looking like this. And it also flies then in July together with everything. The female can be then mistaken by 𝘰𝘩𝘢𝘬𝘢𝘬𝘢𝘬𝘢𝘬𝘢𝘬𝘢𝘬𝘢𝘬𝘢𝘬𝘢𝘬𝘢𝘬𝘢𝘬𝘢𝑚𝑒𝑑𝑖𝑎 which flies on this exactly the same spot on the upper side, but the underside is uniquely different. So you cannot mistake for it. And it is in this area, it's in many places rather abundant. Then we have this Aquilo, which has been discussed. So if it is it's only Glandon or not, but now with DNA, it's been found that the Pyrenean species is different from the Alpine species, and the northern species is also different. But you can see this is much further north, and a completely different habitat. And this looks like it's widespread, but in reality, it's only on limestone, barren, rocky ground. So more or less, or not only limestone, but calcareous ground. And where you then have the host plant 𝘧𝘪𝘊𝘍𝘍 oppositifolia. It presumably lives also on other plants, because there are areas where the butterfly occurs, but there are no 𝘧𝘪𝘊𝘍 oppositifolia. So this is the same as with many of the other. They have presumably several host plants, but this is still to be figured out. And this is also a species which you cannot mistake for anything else, because this wing pattern and wing coloring is truly unique, and also the underside, there's nothing else. And as you can see here, it's up on high altitude, but in the very north, it's down to so this is Altafjord in northern Norway. You can see that this is on the sea level. But this is a typical habitat where you have these 𝘧𝘪𝘊𝘍 oppositifolia growing in small patches, and the butterflies are flying around. And I just added it. This is a common and widespread species, which just means that for people coming from Central Europe, it's a bit exotic to see this one in number. But you cannot mistake determination, because this is then purplish, so dark blue, and occurs in all kinds of moist habitats, and in needle taiga forests and opening, and so it feeds on various kinds of vaccinium species, and also on Andromeda. So this is a species which you will encounter when you go north, if you get some sunshine, and actually, so it cannot be mistaken for any of the other ones, but it's good to have it here, so you're not surprised to see something which looks slightly different from most of the licanids, but still it's rather widespread here. And then we have the 𝘰𝘩𝘢𝘬𝘓, which, when you look here, it looks like widespread, but the recent distribution is like this. So there's not very much left of it. It crashed in 1987, so when we had this very poor summer, and it's also has been before. So on woodland, not woodland. So agricultural habitats which were not fertilized, but with increased amount of fertilization. So the host plant, Bistorta vivipara, which is the only host plant in the north, because we don't have these other Bistorta going to be started in the north at all. So this is outcompeted by larger plant when these areas were fertilized. So now it's mainly on wetlands, so ground on calcareous ground. Is doing good on military training fields, but as you can see, it's got retreated a lot from being in almost all of it in farmed areas and so forth, to very few places. So around Östersund and some fjord valleys in Norway and land rising places. So this one is also doing badly in the north, not only in Central Europe. This is also a very early species. So it can start to fly mid-May if it's an early season and snow melting is early, and it can also fly late if this is a late season, which then occasionally happens up in this region at least. It's also so that this looks slightly different. So they are duller in coloring compared with the southeastern European ones, and also the Pyrenean ones so are brighter in coloring than these northern ones. So there was the lichenids. Any comments?
I don't see any comment.
Okay.
I think we have now some Hesperidae and then some Pieridae. I think we can do all together.
So yes, there's
and then
only
as a-
five species left now. So
All right.
So for people from Scandinavia, Pyrgus andromede is much more exotic than Pyrgus centauri. But if you're coming from Central Europe, I guess it will be quite different, because Pyrgus centauri, the next species, is restricted to Fennoscandia in the Western Europe, whereas Pyrgus andromede is in most mountains throughout Europe. But if you have your Scandinavian glasses on, this is the more exotic species, and it's also a much more exotic habitat, because it's only on very steep, so suddenly sun exposed, so screes on more and more so calcareous ground where you have so a lot of rich plants. It partly co-occur with this Boloria polaris, or did occur at least partly occur. And then you have the host plant, which you see as the white flowers, the Dryas octopetala. So this is a rather exotic species in the Nordic countries, and it flies only on higher altitude, always above tree lines, never below tree lines where you don't find the host plant. And it also flies in the main period where most of the real arcto-alpine, so butterflies or lepidopteras are flying. So this is a bit risky terrain to be in, but it's very nice here. You have a lot of interesting bees and other things flying around, and you can see this has this olive green brownish green underside as many of the other Pyrgus species, and then we had the only other one which occurs in the northern part is this then Pyrgus centauri, which is much more widespread, but this is the entire then European distribution. So if you come from the south, this is much more exotic. And this is exactly the same habitat as for Boloria freya, Boloria frigga, and Erebia embla. But it flies out in the open ground as than Erebia, so freya mainly. So it's bugs of various kinds, and it flies up to the tree line, and you can see it above tree line. And I've been then checking several times when I've been here to see if there was not Pyrgus andromedae, which would be very interesting from our horizon. But it's, if you're able to catch them or control them, it's always then if Pyrgus centauri, which been flying up. So mainly it's up to tree line, and I've never seen centauri and andromedae on the same habitat. So andromedae is well above tree line, and centauri is mostly below tree line and near tree line if it's above it. It has a fairly long flight period from June into July, depending on what latitude you are. But this is also then feeding on 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘯𝘕, the cloudberry. If you compare these ones, you can see that andromedae is a bit paler and less contrast than centauri, which is really black and white. You can see the fringes are very distinct black and white. Also on the hind wings, you have some kind of whitish pattern on the hind wings, whereas here you have just some kind of paler or so blotches. And you can see there are some differences on the underside. So this one you have this stretch. If I go back, and you have this white spot. So on the forewing, which is this one is lacking, and here you have some kind of dark spots. But basically on the habitat you can see it. So there's a slight difference in coloring on the other. This one is a bit darker and more brownish, and this is a bit more greenish. But if they're a bit worn, there's no difference anymore. Let's go back to this one. Here you have this wing is a bit folded. You cannot see that you have a white so line in between these two blotches, but this is also actually a good character. On the photo you can see this one and you can see this part, but you didn't see in between. But this means that you can fairly easy so distinguish these ones, because this one is really black and white, and this is not as distinct, and the fringes are not as distinct. And if you're uncertain, you can check these things as well. But the habitat will presumably be revealed things, because Andromeda will never be on bogs, and this one will not be well above the timberline. So okay, then we have any questions on Pyrgus?
No questions.
Then we continue. This is very easy because this is the only one species. You cannot so mistake it for anything else. So this is a species which is like many other 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘳𝘓 species, very variable between years. So some years it's abundant, and some years you hardly find it. And it seems that as many other 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘳, I think it can have a 2-year or 3-year or 4-life cycle, eventually all 5 years, because depending on the season, they just hibernate another year. The larvae, if it's a very poor season. It flies then also on this tundra heath, which is then partly dry, but you have a lot of moving groundwater. So where you then get these host plants, Bald's alpina and Pedicularis hirsuta, which do not occur where it's entirely dry and not where it is entirely wet. And this is, so if you go several times up in mountains, you will see occasionally it's an abundant species, and occasionally it's quite rare. It's also, as many others, starting to retreat, so northwards. And you can find it down to the tree line, but rarely below tree line. So it's also a tundra heath species, but not on the higher altitudes. This is easy for this. Any comments on Iduna?
No.
Okay, then we'll go for the final run for the three.
Final round.
Yes, the three Colia species. There are other species which are migrants in Scandia, but they do not occur. They are not known to have be found ever in the vicinity of the northern parts of Fennoscandia. At least perhaps some in Finland in older times, but rarely otherwise. And then 𝘰𝘩𝘢𝘬𝘓, so it's the only orange that Colia species in the north. So it's impossible to make any mistake on. It's distributed like this, but as many of the other ones, it's much more scattered. It flies on higher altitudes on dry tundra heaths with on calcareous ground. So it's these limestone areas which are flower rich. You can see the 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘆𝘢, but this one species feeds on Astragalus alpinus. So if you find the habitats with Astragalus alpinus, you will find a number of interesting Lepidoptera. This is a good indicator. And this is the one of the Coleas which goes to the highest altitudes. So, but it's not up in the scree habitats. So, but rather in the higher parts of small mountain valleys where you have this kind of rich geology and rich flora. And you can see that these butterflies are orange when they're flying, but all Colia species also in the north only show their underside when they're sitting. So this is then the typical thing. But if you see a Coleus which is orange, so around the discal spot on the underside, so it's clearly 𝘰𝘠𝘢𝘬𝘓. There's no other species, so which looks like that. And then you have then a 𝘰𝘠𝘧𝘪𝘐. This has various names. Also, it flies also on dry tundra heaths with the same host plants. It flies should also feed on the big areas of Astragalus frigidus, but the main host plant is then alpinus. And this flies on slightly lower altitudes, but also so the lower part of 𝘉𝘰𝘓, the orange ones, and the upper parts of 𝘬𝘰 are the same. But 𝘬𝘰 flies down to the tree line. Could occasionally be found also below tree line. But this one has no orange whatsoever. And the male is slightly yellowish, and the female is then grayish white. There is a form of this one which is supposed to be a hybrid between 𝘉𝘰𝘓 and 𝘬𝘰, which is called Christensoni. So if you find something which is resembling, I think there's only males of this Christensoni, which has a slight orange coloring, but looks like this, and it's supposed to be a hybrid between 𝘉𝘰𝘓 and 𝘬𝘰. So they are quite rare. So if you find something which confuses you, then it's presumably this form Christensoni, which is assumed to be a hybrid. And then you have then the 𝘰𝘠𝑎𝑠 paleno, which is then a typical bog species which occur all over the place. It's now starting to vanish from southernmost Sweden, and I think it's vanished from most sites in Central Europe as well. So this is a typical bog species, but it flies then up to the tree line and can be observed occasionally above tree line. And it flies earlier than the real mountainous species, but it flies into the same flight period as the other two. So you can encounter them. This feeds then on Vacciniums, the other host plant, and has actually less to do with the tundra habitat. But if you check this one, so here if it's orange here around the discal spot, then it's 𝘉𝘰𝘓. If it's kind of grayish white, So around here, then it's 𝘰𝘠, and if it's white, then it's a female 𝘉𝘬𝘦, and if it's yellowish, it's a male 𝘉𝘬𝘦. And here you can also see this one is so orange as well, or warm, and this has a distinct discal spot, or even two discal spots surrounded by red, which is obvious, whereas then 𝘰𝘠, then you have a small discal spot, occasionally with red, more or less red, but never this typical very white. So you can see it then from the underside when you sit, and then 𝘉𝘬𝘦 has this also distinct bright white spot with some kind of reddish surrounding. So you can clearly see things, and when they're flying, this one is clear orange. The males of this one are sulfuric yellowish. The females are bright white, and 𝘰𝘠 is then grayish white. So you can also see directly when they're flying the which species it is. And that's about it. So any comments or questions about this?
We don't have any comment here. Let's see. Wait. Well, someone is Moa Peterson. Thank you for a lovely lecture, Niels. Now I feel inspired to head up to the mountains and do some inventory again. I hope you recover soon and get rid of the cough. Best wishes. Indeed, it's been an amazing talk, and well, it will inspire many people to learn about this species, and hopefully also if they could travel and go to these amazing places, that would be very, very nice.
I could say there's a lot of places so where people rarely have gone, because so it's good to go to places to learn these habitats, but it's also good if people were going. There are a lot of places in between the southernmost mountains and the northernmost mountains, and also so in where it's difficult to get in the very north, so which have been rarely studied. So there's still a lot of things to be done.
Exactly. And there are still, as you said, places to visit, places where there are changes in the land use, and also we can see changes in the populations due to those changes. Could be abandonment, could be actually the opposite, no, like logging. So yeah, it's been great, Niels. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you also. I hope you recover from that cough also. But I have to say that you did very well. I thought you would have more problems with the cough, but it was really, there was no problem with that. People are thanking you for the nice lecture. We are going to. We are recording this. We are going to share this in YouTube so people could check this. Me myself will go there in a week to check again the species. To learn more about it. I want to share that we will have one more masterclass that has been confirmed for the 29th of this month. It will be about Macaronesia species. It will include Canary Islands, Madeira, and Azores. It will be in Spanish, but it will be recorded, and then we will add the subtitles when we post it in YouTube. So in that way, everyone can also attend and learn about those species. Christine is having some problems with the Zoom.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, so sorry, my video is not working. Sorry for that. Yeah, it was really great, Niels. I was wondering how to really monitor in those areas with the pit box and everything. It should be challenging also to walk and to find the species, and especially the short period of flying, no? Because it has to be not many weeks of flying the butterflies. So you really need to be exactly on that moment. Yeah, I never been so high recording butterflies, but I will. I
Probably
will
you
try.
have to go. July would be the month, Niels, not to see most of the species.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would advise to come so for average, so to say, so end of June until mid-July, most things are happening. So there are so 𝘉𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘳𝘢 and 𝘰𝘰𝘭𝘰𝘳𝘓 is a bit earlier, but most things will be on the wings. So during the 3 weeks from end of June or exactly beginning of July, depending on season, and then 3 weeks onwards.
All right.
Great.
Yeah.
To keep it in mind.
Exactly.
Keep this in the 𝘉𝘧𝘬𝘭𝑚.
So,
Great.
but I have experienced that it's been snowing for a week in mid July. So
Oh,
I
wow.
I cannot not promise anything.
Of course, no, of course.
But if you get nice weather, it will be something you will recall for the rest of your life. Then it's just fantastic.
Yeah, indeed.
The sun just goes like this all the time.
Yeah, you don't see the night, and you have to be protected for the mosquitoes, right? It
Yeah.
can be really
Yeah, that's
hard.
as I said in the beginning. It's really so that is a co-variation between mosquitoes and butterfly activity.
Yes.
Indeed. Okay.
Yeah,
Great. Thank you so much.
You have to buy the stuff from the Scandinavians, because if you use the mosquito repellent from South Europe, the mosquitoes will only laugh at you.
Indeed. Yeah. You have to adapt to the latitude.
Right.
Great. Thank you so much, Niels. It was a really nice masterclass.
And welcome to Fennoscandia.
Yeah, great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. We have several people watching, so we hope to see you in the next master classes. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.